Hello and welcome to Effortless Mastery. Today we'll be learning on the histology of connective tissues. The histology of connective tissues. Now, when the word connective tissue is used, I would like to look at each of the words. Histology is when you study the structure of the human body at the cellular or tissue level. So when I now mention tissues are a group of cells that carry out a particular function. So if I say connective tissue, I would say those are a group of cells that actually carry out a function of connectivity, linking one cell with another. But beyond that, they bind cells together or bind organs together. They anchor organs. So connective tissue is what will hold, for example, your heart in place. That while you are running, when you are running, your heart is not also jumping. You understand? So what holds your organs and fix them in place are actually going to be components of connective tissues. Now, connective tissue, today I want to focus on how it is broken down. The main constituents of connective tissue are cells and the things outside the cells. So that is the cells and extra. Extra means outside, extracellular matrix. It is the cells that will actually produce this. I'm going to come to that. Cells and extracellular matrix. Now, for the cells, we have two major cells. They are either permanent cells or transient cells. Who are permanent cells? Permanent cells are cells that are always found in connective tissue. When you go to connective tissue, you always have fibroblasts, fibrocytes, and adipocytes. Like that is their main location. So that is their residence place. So they are called permanent cells or resident cells. They are always there. But transient cells, which if you observe them, they are all white blood cells. They are usually red blood cells. Transient cells are people that come in based on the condition. So imagine that there is a particular infection in a particular organ. These cells will leave the blood supply and enter the organ to fight that infection. So they come in and you might see them today and not see them again later. So that's why they are called transient or temporary cells. Now for the permanent cells, we have fibroblasts, fibrocytes, adipocytes. For fibroblasts is the most abundant. You must note, a fibroblast is the most abundant cell type that we have in connective tissue. The most abundant cell type is fibroblasts. Beyond that, fibroblasts are very active. They're the ones that will produce the extracellular matrix. So fibroblasts, the most abundant cell type in connective tissue. Number two, they are very active. They're active. And number three, they produce extracellular matrix. Number four, they are immature. So fibroblasts are immature. They're the ones that are actively working. And while they're actively working, what are they producing? Extracellular matrix. And then they're the most abundant cell type. Now, fibrocyte is a matured fibroblast. So once fibroblast becomes matured, maturity in this case is that it will produce extracellular matrix and the matrix will now surround it. So once the matrix surrounds him, he becomes fibrocytes, which are matured cells, and these matured cells are inactive. So usually anytime you hear the word blast, it tells you about a cell that is immature. When you hear cytes, it tells you about a cell that is matured. Fibrocytes are matured cells. Then adipocytes, matured inactive. Adipocytes are the ones that will store fat. Adipocytes stores fat. That's adipose tissue. Now, when the cell has a lot of adipocytes, we call it adipose tissue. But that is just that for that. We come to transient neutrophils. Neutrophils are white blood cells that fight bacterial infections. Now, usually first line of defense. Now, macrophages are actually monocytes that are found in tissues. So once monocytes leave blood, it is now called macrophage or histiocyte. Histiocyte is another name. Now, then eosinophils will be for parasitic infections. Lymphocytes, in this case, both B and T. Of course, you know B will differentiate to give you plasma cell. We'll do that when I teach you immunity. So lymphocytes, then mast cells. Mast cells are just like the similitude of basophils. Basophils are in blood, and within blood, they usually produce histamine. Mast cells are in tissues, and they do the same. So they are similar to basophils, really for allergic reactions. Now, when I come to my extracellular matrix, for extracellular matrix, what I have here is majorly books will tell you protein fibers and ground substance. Other books will now add tissue fluid. But at least broadly, extracellular matrix, which is what we have outside the cells, is protein fibers and ground substance. The protein fibers we have is either collagen, elastic, or reticular. Collagen is the most abundant. The most abundant cell was who? Fibroblasts. The most abundant protein fiber is collagen. Collagen is the most abundant. It has 5 cell types. No, we have many types, but the ones we really care about for your level as a medical student and nursing student or whatever department you are doing undergraduate is really the 5 types. Collagen type 1 is the one we see in bones, we see it in tendons, and we even see it in cartilage too. So that is collagen type 1. We see it in bones, we see it in tendons. Now, when we go to type 2, the cartilage is fibrocartilage. Type 2 of still collagen fiber will now be the other type of cartilage, like elastic cartilage and hyaline cartilage. We'll have type 2. Now, the next thing is now type 3. Type 3 is found in fact, type 3 collagen are just reticular fibers. They are found in reticuloendothelial systems. Type 4 will be a component of basement membrane. So we are going to do epithelium still in histology. That's epithelium rests on something called basement membrane. So that basement membrane, the particular protein fiber found within the basement membrane will be type 4 collagen. Then type 5 is seen in fetal membranes, that's in fetus, fetal membranes. So those are the 5 types of collagen. Now type 1 is abundant in bones, that's where you see it. All right, then we have elastic fibers. They don't have great tensile strength like collagen fibers, but at least they have elastin, which will ensure that they're elastic. Remember what elasticity is all about. That you drag it, it will always return to its normal size, as far as it is not beyond the elastic limit. Hooke's law in physics. All right, now reticular fibers are actually type 3 collagen fibers. Now for my ground substance, what should I know about ground substance? They are either glycosaminoglycans, proteoglycans, or adhesive glycoproteins. This is how I like to put it. There are glycosaminoglycans. We have different types of or different examples. The main example or the main type is hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid is a very wonderful glyco, carbohydrates, amino, protein, glycan. All right, so you know that. Now, glycosaminoglycans, number 1, which is hyaluronic acid, is the most abundant, but yet it does not bind with sulfates and it does not form protein aggregates. So hyaluronic acid, which is the most abundant glycosaminoglycan, does not bind to sulfates, and it does not also form protein aggregates. Rather, the other glycosaminoglycans like demathan sulfate, from the name you hear sulfate in it. Demathan sulfate, you hear heparan sulfate, you hear chondroitin sulfate, and some people talk about keratan sulfate. All of these people, damathan, heparan, chondroitin, and keratan sulfates, are all glycosaminoglycans. But the only difference is that hyaluronic is the most abundant. They have sulfate attached to it. Number 2, they can attach with proteins. And when they attach to proteins, they form proteoglycans. So this is what I'm trying to capture. The glycosaminoglycans, there are about 5 types, 5 examples, of which hyaluronic acid is the most abundant. But yet still, despite being the most abundant, it's not soluble in water, does not bind to protein, does not bind to sulfates. The other ones are bounded to sulfates, bind to proteins to form proteoglycans, and then they are soluble in water. Then lastly, adhesive glycoproteins. Adhesive glycoproteins are the people that will, from the word adhesion, adhesive. Adhesion is the idea that you link two different people together. So adhesive glycoprotein example is fibronectin. We will link the cells to the fibers. So what links cells to the protein fibers is your adhesive glycoproteins. And I gave you an example of fibronectin. So when we mention connective tissue, the main connective tissue, which I will regard as connective tissue proper. You would ask me, why am I bringing up connective tissue proper? Because a bone is a connective tissue, just that it is a specialized connective tissue. So that's why in histology, after you have thought about the general connective tissue, you thought of the connective tissue proper. The next thing will now be specialized, where you talk about bones. Even blood is a connective tissue that is in fluid form, so it is still specialized. So blood, bone, cartilage are all connective tissue, but they are just specialized. But for the proper connective tissue, we have two types, either loose or dense. Loose connective tissues have abundant cell types, they have abundant ground substance, but they have very few protein fibers. That's why they are called loose. They have abundant cells, abundant ground substance, but few protein fibers. It's seen in most places, loose connective tissue. For dense, dense will have fewer cell types. In fact, it's really fibroblasts we have there, and few cells generally. Fewer cells and fewer cell types. It will have few or less ground substance, but the main thing in dense is protein fibers. For loose, you had cells and ground substance and little of protein fibers. For dense, you have protein fibers, little of cell types, little of ground substance. And then the dense is now subdivided into dense regular and dense irregular. Dense regular is the example of all these tendons, ligaments, which are in straight lines. So dense regular and dense irregular. Dense regular, the protein fibers, they are plenty, but they are arranged in a regular pattern. Irregular is that they are just arranged anyhow. And for the regular, it will prevent, more like it supports tensile strength in one direction since they are parallel to each other. So you can really prevent problems in one direction, unlike dense, which will be in different directions. So that covers histology of connective tissue. The most abundant cell type, fibroblasts. The most abundant protein fiber, collagen. The most abundant glycosaminoglycan, hyaluronic acid. What's the function of fibroblast? Is the one that will produce extracellular matrix. What's the function of glycoprotein? The one that will attach the cells to the fibers. I mentioned that we have loose and dense. Loose has abundant cells, abundant ground substance, little protein fibers. Dense have more protein fibers but less of the other two. So that is just that for connective tissue. I hope you understood. If you have any question, do well to type it out in the comment section. Ensure you like this video, share this video. So as many people you know this video will help. Thank you very much.